Yep. All right. Well, yeah, welcome everybody to today's Ice Jam event. Really pleased to have so many folks joining us from around the state of Alaska, and I know we have folks from the state of Washington and who knows where else actually. So always love to encourage folks that are from far and wide to post where you're at in the where you're located in the chat. It's great for us to use these opportunities to get to know each other. So today, Ice Jam switched it up a little bit. We're using a slightly different tool and technology. We're using Zoom, which I feel like we've all become super familiar with over the last few months. And we're gonna have a webinar with some amazing speakers engaging with us through our partners at the Alaska Angel Conference. So the title of today's presentation is How to Invest and Raise Capital During the Pandemic. Really pleased as Alaska Center Ice to be co-hosting this with the Alaska Angel Conference organizers here, and I know the Angel Conference is quickly ramping up to some exciting things that are coming up soon, so I know we'll hear more about that through today's presentation. Last but not least, I didn't actually introduce Center Ice, but I think for those who aren't familiar with who the co-organizing organization is for this event, Alaska Center Ice is a Center for Innovation, Commercialization, and Entrepreneurship. We're based under the University of Alaska, and our primary focus is we kind of try and provide funding to startups, support to startups and innovators, and experiences for staff, students, and faculty to get involved in the innovation and entrepreneurial world. So the Ice Jam events have really been a brainchild. We're now on our third Ice Jam event, and we're doing these because we recognize how distanced everyone's become during the pandemic, and we're committed to continuing to roll these out, and we have been doing them on a monthly basis to get you guys in. So without further ado, really pleased to have everyone here. I'm going to go quiet and silent and hand it over to Mark Billingsley, who's going to be our MC for today, engaging with our panelists from the Alaska Angel Conference. So Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, my name is Mark Billingsley. For those of you who don't know me, I have a background in engineering. I'm a member of the Alaska Bar Association. I'm a registered patent attorney. I'm the director of the Office of Intellectual Property and Commercialization at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which protects and commercializes the IP that's developed at the university. What happened was a few years ago, to further that mission, we were like, let's see if we can spur even more innovation and entrepreneurialism. So we set up Center Ice, which is what Nigel just described there. And as Nigel was saying, some of our programs are limited to UAF, but many are open to the entire UA system, and some are open to the general public. One partner program that we support is the Alaska Angel Conference, and you'll hear more about that today from Kevin Croy, who's one of our speakers. I've really been looking forward to this event. I think Alaska has a burgeoning startup ecosystem. Necessarily, that ecosystem involves not just startup companies, but also investors. Today, we have two representatives from the investment community, though they might also have work experience working at startups. And we also have an Alaska entrepreneur who's currently working on her first startup. We've got Joel Yarman. He's founder and managing director of Pipeline Capital Partners. And previously, he led the seed stage venture program at DFJ Venture Capital. Mary Alice Terlidis, she had a decade-long career in hair and beauty when she saw greater opportunity and pursued her current startup, Hair Voyage, where she is CEO and founder. And we've got Kevin Croy. He's a general partner at seed stage venture capital firm 9 Mile Labs. He is co-founder of the Alaska Angel Conference, and he's a serial entrepreneur. If you have questions for our speakers, please submit them through the Q&A feature down there at the bottom of your screen in the middle. You'll see that. It allows us to monitor them and work through them better. Also, though, we are leaving open the chat function, as Nigel noted, and already people are using for conversation and comments as we go along. We're going to wrap this up within an hour or around 1 or 2 o'clock Alaska time, but we do plan to stick around past that as long as people want to keep talking. So thanks for joining us today, and now let's get to our speakers. Joel, we'll do introductions, and let's start with Joel and then Mary Alice and Kevin. So Joel, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little about yourself, your connection to Alaska and Pipeline CP?
Sure thing, Mark. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Joel Yarman. I founded a venture capital firm called Pipeline Capital Partners. But well before that, I was raised in Anchorage, Alaska, went to Inlet View, Romick, and West, was on the Alyeska ski team with Tommy Moe, and family is still there. So lots of ties to Alaska. Pipeline Capital is a West Coast based, including Alaska, venture capital fund investing in early stage technology startups. I'm investing out of my sixth fund. So 5 prior funds have included about 250 investments into really fantastic teams of entrepreneurs working on everything from self-driving cars to digital currency to rockets that go into space to something as boring as commission tracking. So really big markets, investing for businesses going to market all across the United States, not just in places on the coast like the Bay Area or New York. Or Hong Kong or Sydney. So Pipeline invests $300,000 to $1 million first money in, always alongside other institutional investors into companies, generally raising $500,000 to $2.5 million. And the valuations are typically in the single-digit millions of dollars. So this is my 15th year doing it, and really looking forward to seeing some of the ideas and dialogue coming out there today.
Thanks, Joel. Let's move to Mary Alice. We've got Joel and Kevin here representing the investor side of things, but Mary Alice, can you tell us about your experience as an entrepreneur, what your business is, how you started, your current status?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So my name is Mary Alice, and my business is Hair Voyage, and we are a marketplace app that connects beauty professionals for paid peer education. And our process has been very unique. Our first raise was during the pandemic. Hi, Kai. And yes, it was absolutely interesting timing. I think, this conversation is a lot about like why Alaska and why are things working in pandemics. And our business is modeled a lot after the Airbnb model. And I think looking at other businesses and other time periods where the landscape was not, it was rickety, just like the pandemic. There was a lot of incredible things that came out of that time, and Airbnb was one of those. And so since we are so connected to Airbnb's model, it's been really cool for us to have a beginning in the same type of challenging period. And also our particular industry for our startup has had a lot of, everyone is in motion during the pandemic, and everyone's being sent in new directions. And so for us, and as entrepreneurs, I think that's just really exciting because obviously there's a lot of really hard things about the pandemic, of course. And then there's also a lot of really exciting possibilities that are created because of those. So for us being in the Angel Conference during that time period, the Angel Conference had begun before the pandemic started, and we were kind of in the middle of it when all of the shutdowns in the beauty industry were happening. And so being in the process and then having to pivot in process of the competition, our actual product really helped us just to kind of learn about the life of a startup and how to respond to things quickly. And we changed our entire service to a remote experience. So that's just been a little bit of like details around how it's affected us. And the first time we participated in an Angel Conference, we were using it as just kind of a guide to get more information around like, what is this process like? How do you launch something? What do you need to know? And it really informed us of where we needed to go. It's a really great roadmap. And we took that information, we implemented it, and we ended up getting into the final of the second Angel Conference. So I think it was really impactful for us. And every startup is different, and of course everyone's needs are different. So it's hard to, I can just talk about what my experience was around raising money for the first time. And I think what our business does, connecting beauty professionals to their peers for mentorship, is so similar and important in the entrepreneur space. And I think that was really helpful for us, the Alaskan community that we have in the startup world is very, very important to us, and it really helped us kind of make those decisions and help us understand the territory, because, you know, especially being in a competition, like the investors and the entrepreneurs, it's a very professional relationship. And so having peers that you can go and talk to and ask about their experience in raising money and learning about things that have worked for them or things that were important questions, that was really helpful and necessary for us to progress. So I really would recommend that to other entrepreneurs, is to kind of gather the people and gather diverse opinions of other entrepreneurs that you value and that you've learned from, and continue to like lean on them through the process when you're going through any type of raise. Let's see, another point that I want to make about being a beauty tech company, we were really not sure that that people would invest in us, because we're a beauty company and not a lot of people, you know, beauty is already an underrepresented community. And so being in Alaska, where we are kind of, we're not New York City, we're not LA, it's not a super valuable, we didn't believe it was a super valuable space. It's not any of the main territories that Alaska thrives on, right? Like it's not oil and gas. And so we were hesitant. We were like, oh, we might not get investors in Alaska. We might have to go to LA or New York for this experience. And I think it's kind of the same subject of like entrepreneurs believing that it can't happen in Alaska and that they have to go somewhere else for an accelerator or something like that. And it was really exciting, because once we learned about the investors and the different reasons why they're interested in investing in our company, us succeeding in beauty opens up different areas for, you know, we're software as a service, and that can affect many other parts of Alaska as well. And of course, we're a community-based experience. And so us being able to give more success to the community in Alaska by creating opportunity for them to connect with individuals outside of Alaska, that brings it back to Alaska. So it actually does make it more relevant. And I think I want to encourage people that you may think that others will not, you just be surprised why people want to invest. So I think you should ask those questions when you're going to even just any startup event, like ask investors why they might see this as something investable. And then certainly when you go through the process and you're building the relationships with people that are investing in your company, I think it's really important to know why they're excited about you making it.
Thanks, Mary Alice. And you touched on a few things there that I think we can dig into even deeper, including how did that go for you during the pandemic? I'm sure that was interesting and different. And then also the uniqueness of Alaska, the pros and cons of it. So let's get into that some more in detail here, though. But first, let's talk to Kevin. You were talking a bit there, Mary Alice. I think you said you went through the Alaska Angel Conference twice. Kevin, if you could tell us a little about your background and experience, and then also if you could talk about how the Alaska Angel Conference sort of serves as a bridge from what we heard about the work that Joel's doing and what Mary Alice is doing, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for putting this together, Nigel and Mark, and thanks everybody for attending. Yeah, so my name's Kevin Croy. I'm originally from the Bay Area, but I've been living off and on in Alaska for the last 20 years. I'm permanently living here now in Anchorage for the last 3 years. So love Alaska, have a lot of ties here, and excited to stay here. So let's see. So a little of my background. So I started my career as a software developer and went on to co-found 5 startups in various spaces and had a range of outcomes. You know, I crashed and burned a couple of times and made a small crater in the ground. And so I know what that's like. And then I've had a couple that shut down because they didn't scale. And I learned the value of scalable startups and product market fit. And then I had 2 that were good outcomes, 2 successful exits. Then took a break, went back to school, met some other folks, and we started our first fund. And we started an accelerator based in Seattle called 9 Mile Labs. And we invested in 6 batches of really early stage business to business focused startups. And then we kind of pivoted our own fund into sort of a micro VC where we're typically writing checks in the 50 to 100K, sometimes a little bit more range, but we're often the earliest money into the round. And so in a particular fund, we might get 80 or 100 portfolio companies, which is a little bit of a different model, but necessary when you're investing this early. So anyway, so I have I can wear a number of different hats when it comes to this startup building. And one of my roles in Alaska is as an advisory committee member to the 49th State Angel Fund. And it was through that process that we sort of identified this opportunity for bringing this thing called an angel conference to Alaska. And for those who don't know, an angel conference is really, it's a series of events that lead up to a group of primarily new angel investors getting together and putting an investment into one or more startups from that ecosystem. And so we're just now kicking off the third batch or the third cycle of the Alaska Angel Conference. But through the first two conferences, we invested in, or when I say we, I mean investors from this group have invested in 4 startups, even though there were only 2 quote unquote winners. 4 companies received funding through the process. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more later, Mark.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. A few things that we've started off on here: the pandemic, working in Alaska, and then getting some more detail on the Alaska Angel Conference. So let's start with Alaska specifically. I think all 3 of you all have experience working with work that is based outside of Alaska or that has forced you to go outside, I think in Mary Alice's case. I think most of the folks on the line are from Alaska, but even if you're not, you might be interested about what it's like to be in the startup ecosystem in Alaska. So why invest or start up a company in Alaska, and why do it now? What special opportunities does Alaska present, and what special challenges does Alaska present? Maybe we can start with you, Joel. Joel, how do you view Alaska?
Yeah, I have always, even when I was working at a different venture fund based in Menlo Park, California, Sand Hill Road is the street that everybody commonly knows of. Even when I was investing there, I always had a thesis that there's gold in the hills outside of Silicon Valley, and in fact, that's true, right? Not everybody, in fact, most people don't live in just coastal cities, and unlike places like San Francisco or New York, where the cost of living and the wages are stratospheric, there's far more businesses out there suited towards folks in regular America that I think have a much larger customer base. Businesses like home insurance or package delivery or transportation or food delivery. And so I think what has been exemplified this year in the flight from these coastal cities to places which are either safer, perceived, or actual, have a lower cost of living, have perhaps a more rational environment in which to live in, is that there is now a sea change in, I think, all investors' perceptions of where a business can be founded, how that business interacts with the other employees, right, via video or remote, and where the customers are. And it's entirely possible now to start a very, very big business based entirely somewhere where an investor or an entrepreneur would never have thought to do it before. It's sad that it took this year to prove that to people, but I think now that the box has been cracked open, I don't think you can put the genie back in. And so as I think about Alaska and the opportunities there, Alaska will never be Silicon Valley. That's fine, but necessity breeds innovation. And so I would challenge the people, out there thinking about, business opportunities to say, well, what are the advantages that I have, which are unique to my state, which a place like California or New York or Florida or Chicago or Houston or Boulder doesn't necessarily have. And how can I capitalize on that? I want to hear from other people, but for a hot second there, I think Anchorage was the busiest cargo port in the world and consistently ranks, I think, second in the nation or third next to the FedEx hub in Tennessee and the UPS one, maybe Atlanta. So I mean that's just one idea, but considering the polar ice caps are melting and there's soon going to be ship traffic going to Europe over the pole, considering that there's going to be ubiquitous broadband across the entire state of Alaska from Starlink, which is a SpaceX product, which is in beta today and will be probably live in Alaska at some point next year. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities which, because of whatever circumstances existed before, no longer exist now, which present incredibly compelling opportunities for our state, which you would be hard pressed to find in the traditional startup states that I mentioned earlier.
So this is a bit of a chicken and egg question, but and I don't know if it's just for Joel and maybe it's for Mary Alice and Kevin more so, but do we lack the connections because there's a lot of opportunity, or we don't have as many opportunities, so we don't need the connections right now? The more capital in the lower 48 capital. And Joel, I'm kind of what you're bringing up in my mind, because here's this person from Alaska, families in Alaska, running a venture capital firm, or early stage one. Great, Alaska. I mean, you come up and visit your folks, I'm guessing, and do you think business when you get off the airplane in Anchorage? Or do you look around? Yeah, I don't know. And if so, and if we're lacking the connections, I wonder how to build them. Certainly having somebody from Alaska helps.
Well, I think I was probably just as guilty in some ways as other potential investors in years past, saying, oh no, I would never invest in a company where the founders were all virtual and all disconnected. And so my thesis on that continues to evolve with everybody else's. I do look for startups in Alaska. I focus heavily on technology and consumer and enterprise technology, and many of the startups I see up there don't fall into my bucket, which is neither here nor there. But my hope is that just as people are leaving the coastal cities and either going home or going to other places in America, that there will be people who grew up in Alaska or from Alaska, went to school, got a computer science degree or whatever the heck they got, said, gosh, I've got to be in the Bay Area if I want to work at Facebook or Uber or Google or whatever, where that's no longer true, right? Google's not bringing people back till the end of next year. Twitter's not bringing people back ever. And a bunch of companies have said, hey, don't ever come back. So now suddenly you're working at, big tech company X, living in a much lower cost area like Anchorage, still connected to all of your coworkers. You still have all your ideas. You still see all the opportunities out there, but suddenly you're in a place where it's much less expensive to start a business. You can do it in a remote fashion, so you don't have to convince other people that Alaska is a great place. And I hope you don't, because it's beautiful just the way it is. And we don't need 38 million people like California has. But you can do it now, and you can do it on a fraction of the cost that you could have done it back when Azure or Amazon Web Services or Google AdWords or Facebook ads before that existed. Now it is so much less expensive, more capable, and because of high-speed internet, much more doable to have a startup where there can be people based really anywhere. And so my hope is that I see more businesses which fall within Pipeline's wheelhouse as I go home to Alaska in the coming years.
Yeah, so thanks. So you've laid out this optimistic path that it's possible, it's doable, and pandemic has made it even more feasible and more apparent. There's some other things that maybe we have to work through. And Kevin, I think I've heard you talk a little bit about this or thought about this in the past. Your work, Kevin, I think is split between Alaska and the lower 48. When you go between the two, how do you compare the entrepreneur mindset that you see in Alaska versus the lower 48? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring that up. So I think that this has kind of always been true. It's not about Alaska. It's about the Bay Area and everywhere else. So a lot of amazing companies have been founded outside of the Bay Area, right? So there are people that think of Amazon as a Bay Area company or AWS as being some kind of tied to the Bay Area, but it has nothing to do with the Bay Area, right? Like they grew in Seattle, they grew up there when it wasn't necessarily a great ecosystem for building tech companies. Microsoft, kind of aside, but I think, and to tie this back to the Angel Conference a little bit, when investors are making decisions about where to place their capital, they're kind of going back and forth between this, greed on one side and fear on the other side, right? Like they want to make lots of money, but they don't want to lose their money. And so it's this constant battle, right? As they're looking at companies, they're asking themselves like, gosh, is this going to be the next Salesforce.com, or is this going to be the next webvan.com? Like, which is it going to be? And how do I decide while I still have an opportunity to invest? So with that in mind, there's one thing that I've noticed that makes it so easy to raise capital. And for a startup, capital is often cited as one of the major reasons why they want to move to the Bay Area, right? They want to get there because there's tech talent, of course, but that's where the VCs are, right? That's where I have to go to raise money. The thing that cuts through all the BS when it comes to raising money is traction. If you have traction and you can show that you have product market fit, it doesn't matter where you are. Like you're proving that you can figure it out. Right? The reason that investors don't want to invest in a remote company is because they have that fear of, well, what if you can't hire people? Or what if the cost to acquire customers is too much because you have to travel to New York or the Bay Area? When you have traction, you've demonstrated that you've mitigated the risks. And so I think this question about where are you based is really kind of misguided. It's not about that. It's about what kind of traction do you have and or what's preventing you from getting traction. So with that in mind, there are certain things that you can't do and you shouldn't do from Alaska, right? Like probably not a great idea to open up like a surfboard rental business, in the Cook Inlet. But if you're in Santa Monica, great. So, as long as you're not looking across the board and trying to start every company in every location, I think different locations have strengths and weaknesses. But as Mark Andreessen said, a famous investor and founder of Netscape, software is eating the world. It was true when he said it the first time. It's true today. And the pandemic proves it. I mean, more people are using Slack and Microsoft Teams and Zoom. I mean, we probably wouldn't be doing the Zoom-based webinars if it wasn't for this pandemic. But we've just proven to ourselves, everybody, that we don't have to actually be in the same place to be productive. Like, yes, there are trade-offs, but we can build a great company from anywhere. And so I believe that you can invest in a great company from anywhere and you can build a great company from anywhere. And I think the difference is mindset. I mean, great founders don't let a little thing like, oh, well, there's nobody on my block that knows how to write Python code prevent them from building a great company, right? They figure it out. They reach out, they get on Slack, they network, they do whatever it takes. And to the extent that we have people like that in Alaska, which I think we do, like we were founded by, people that climbed over ridiculous glaciers and died on the way to get here, right? To go dig gold out of the ground. So I think we have it. We have that sort of pioneering mentality, and it exists here. We just need to recognize it early and support it when we see it and nurture it. And I think keep encouraging the mindset that we do see. So anyway, I'm super excited that Mary Alice is on the panel with us today. And of course, I'm excited that she went through the Angel Conference twice and then got funding the second time. So I love the tenacity and perseverance that she demonstrated.
Yeah, well, with that, Mary Alice, talking about the mindset, I think you've demonstrated you have it, right? So, and also that you've had to work. I know you've had to work outside a little bit, at least for some customer discovery, some research. Can you talk a little bit about that and your experience outside versus inside, what you've learned about Alaska startup world?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's so exciting, all the different elements about like being in Alaska and the space, the people, the mindset of the people that live here, the type of businesses. And I think starting at the beginning of my path, it's kind of similar as like I didn't really know that much about Silicon Valley, or I learned about the startup world the more that the idea progressed and the more tools that the community helped me gather. So being on my path in beauty and following my passions, which I think having a deep connection to like what you're doing and why you want to do that helps entrepreneurs figure out the solutions, because they're just like, I'm certainly a person that's led by my passions, and I think that's helped me to find all of the stepping stones. And so I think the same thing that Kevin was explaining about Alaskans is like, we are super inventive. We do understand how to, when people go ice climbing and backpacking, they make sure that the people that are on their team they're in line with and they feel safe and they all have the same mission. And so there's a lot of that same mentality that's bred here. And I guess listening to you all, I'm thankful that I didn't know that much about the Silicon Valley, because I think like all of those, the deterrence, because I think it's nice to be a little bit unaware so you don't get let certain like those things get in the way of your mindset. And I think that that's common in a lot of entrepreneur great stories where you're like, wow, they just did this because that was just what happened in their life. And so for us to go and explore outside of my own world to see if this concept was valid for other people in different areas is why we had to go explore different parts of the US. And we even went to 2 different countries to, part of it is for adventure and to make sure that, and then of course to get research and to understand why would this be helpful in Thailand, or why would this be helpful in Tokyo versus Texas or Washington and Alaska. And I knew Alaska's experience because I had explored it for a long time, just based on being a beauty professional here. And I knew all of my pain points. And I wanted to understand were those valid for other people and what were their unique pain points from their territories and their landscape of perspective of the beauty industry. And the beauty industry is really interesting to me because we call them like hair hubs. Every hub has a different landscape. So LA has different challenges, just like Joel was explaining, and a little bit outside of LA, they have different challenges and different things that make working and living and being in beauty in those spaces great. And so we needed to really understand the uniqueness of each of these hair hubs. So that's why we had to go explore and validate in other places. But I think a huge part of like being in Alaska, that was always part of my challenge, which is why like the original seed of the idea came to life, is I love Alaska and I especially love the summer. And I have my childhood was in Hawaii. So I have a divine unrest of like, I always kind of want to be somewhere else. And I want to see the big city and the lights and the glam and the movie and the action of beauty. But I also want to be in Alaska. And so that was like, okay, well, how can we do that? And how can we bring education here when I want to be here in the summer? Because a lot of times the seasons of education don't line up for the season of like Alaska. So there'll be great classes in different times of the year when really I want to be in Alaska, or it's important for business to be here. So those things have impacted why this business was built. And yeah, I guess going back to fundraising, it's all the same, leaning on the community to learn and going through the resources that are around you. Just like Kevin said, like these experiences, it's a wealth of knowledge that lives here, and we are in Alaska and the resources were available to us here to get to that point. So that's been incredible. And having the community that is so excited about growing the startup world right now. I think that's also another reason why to get involved right now.
Thanks.
And I would love to add, I knew that I'd seen a very well-known venture firm back a business like yours recently, and I went back and I looked, and Bessemer Venture Partners, which is one of those Sand Hill Road firms, a couple of years ago put $15 million into an Indian startup called My Glam. So there is absolutely a precedent for venture investment in your kind of business. I knew I'd seen it, and I wanted to say that in case you weren't aware of it. But every kind of business out there at some point gets to the point where it might be right for venture. I mean, venture is highly dilutive, and you give up a lot of control to people that you really have to be married to for the next 10 years. I say it's the next closest thing to a wedding, but don't think that because you're in one industry that venture hasn't already kicked over stones and tried to find diamonds in the rough in there before, because more than likely it's absolutely happened.
Thank you. I hadn't heard of that. I'm excited.
Check it out. My Glam with 2 M's.
Okay.
Nice, making connections. That's what we're here for. That's great. So Debbie, I did see that Debbie Attook mentioned the startups coming out of the Bristol Bay Development Fund, City Middlestat's on the line. That is great work. Really interested to see how that's going as well. I also saw that Meg posted a link in the chat to the Alaska Angel Conference, and you've mentioned it a couple times. Kevin, can you tell us some more about the Alaska Angel Conference?
Sure. So we identified this opportunity in the in the Alaska startup ecosystem here, and obviously there's a lot of wealth in this state, and the people, individuals and company are wealthy. A lot of that money is sitting on the sidelines though when it comes to angel investing and early stage startup investing, which is interesting since we all know and love this thing called the Alaska Permanent Fund, and we all understand the value of investing and identifying opportunities early and backing them. So anyway, it seemed like a real opportunity. At the same time, we have startups who are looking to raise capital, and we have a group of angel investors here in Alaska. And there could be a lot more was the opportunity. So the goal was, how do we get more angel investors involved in the process? And the process of becoming an angel investor is a little bit more than just pulling out your checkbook. I mean, you want to actually understand what you're doing. You want to network with other investors and share deals or opportunities that you see. You want to work together as teams to evaluate opportunities and conduct due diligence, and then actually handle the follow through and coaching and supporting and all that stuff. Angel investing really is kind of a team sport, and so this angel conference model was created to sort of nurture the angel investor community, educate, train, and grow this community. At the same time, nurturing, supporting, investing in the startups in your community. And so the way it works is that we set out to recruit a group of angel investors, and they come into this process. And then we identify people who are interested in becoming angel investors or think they might like to try it or learn about it. And we pull these people together, and then over a series of weeks, we work as a group to learn the process of angel investing, and we do it by actually writing a check. So the way that people become investors is by investing, and we'll share more details about that later. But essentially, people can come in, they put a small amount of money into a fund, and then they work as a group to make an investment decision with that money. So that's the investor sort of side of that. Now, simultaneously, there's kind of this entrepreneurial track where there's a group of entrepreneurs who are seeking funds, and we work with them and we coach the investors to work with them to nurture them and learn about their business and learn how to ask great questions about their product and their market and how their team is going to grow, how they're going to recruit, all these risks that we can identify, we try to identify and understand how is the company thinking about mitigating them? What have they done to mitigate that risk, or what do they plan to do about it? And so anyway, we've done this a couple times now in Anchorage, sorry, and excited to do it this third time. I keep saying Seattle because Seattle is where I saw this in action the first time. And in Seattle, they've done the Seattle Angel Conference. I think it's 15 or 16 times now. They've invested millions of dollars into lots of different companies. And I've personally seen and know of several angel investors who have moved to become full-time investors, writing checks personally as their job. And then a couple others who actually raised venture funds and are now full-time investing that way. So from an ecosystem development standpoint, it's super interesting. And right now applications are open. I know Melanie posted a link in there. So if people are interested, they can definitely apply and learn more.
Thanks. That's the raising capital through this really nicely organized. Go to the website, figure out how to it's the raising capital and the investing. Nicely laid out, hold your hand through the process, and actually get access to some of Alaska's top startup companies. We did get a question in the Q&A, and it reminds me that we should address all levels here, and it's just simply to all three. So how do we raise capital? And there are so many different answers to that question. From the early stage venture capital side, I think we just heard a little of the Alaska Angel Conference angle to that. But Joel, what is just sort of the earliest primer you give to people when you're maybe talking to them, how to access you or early stage venture capital?
Yeah, and I think I'll try to dovetail it with another question I saw in there is, how do I do due diligence? I mentioned earlier that a partnership with an investor like me, I view as the next closest thing to a marriage. And you really, really want to know your partner well, because unlike public investment in Apple or eBay or Uber or Tesla, once you sign on the dotted line and you're in business with that person, suddenly they have a say. It might be a minority say, but they still have a say in how you should run your business. And so you really want to ensure that the alignment of interests is there, especially as it pertains to the sizing and outcome of your business. If your venture investor is investing out of a fund that's $1 billion, and they look at your business and they say, well, this thing needs to be a public company for me to be able to return my fund, and yours is a lemonade stand, it's probably not a good fit. Whereas somebody that maybe was a retired executive from Minute Maid, to continue the analogy, might say, boy, I think I could get 2 or 3 times my money here, and I have a really good background in how to start and run and source a lemonade stand. And so really knowing where the best sources of capital for you might come from is really, for me, the most important thing. I say no to most of the businesses that I see, and that's not because most of the businesses are not great businesses that I don't believe will generate positive revenue. Small business runs America. Let's not make any mistakes about that. I mean, the corporate tax code in America enables the big folks to hide a lot of money overseas and whatever else that we don't need to get into. Small business runs America, but small business and venture capital are not inexorably aligned, right? I mean, there really are very few businesses which are right for this type of capital partnership. So as you think about bringing on capital partners, I guess one, you should always try to surround yourself with people that you trust from the beginning. This is what's called traditionally the friends and family round, where people are willing to invest 4 to 5 digits, maybe 6 digits worth of capital in your business. At the point at which you need more than that, yes, then you either go to an institutional investor like us on the call, or go to other angels like from the Seattle Angel Conference or the Alaska Angel Conference, who have a background in your space, maybe worked in an industry that's orthogonal to what it is that you're doing, and really will be able to help you move the needle. When I look at founders, if it's more than one, I want non-concentric overlap. So I don't want 1 + 1 to equal 2. I want 1 + 1 to equal 3 circles. And the same is true for the entrepreneur looking at me. When you look at me, you should understand what it is I can and can't do for you, my past investment track record, and talking to some of my past and present CEOs that I've partnered with currently or before would be helpful. But you also have to understand that it's incredibly rare for any investor to be able to do all of the things that you need to get to the next round of progress, whether it's the next round of capital, launching your business, having access to the right salespeople. And so just as I look at founding teams to say, well, okay, what does this person bring and what does this person bring? And I hope it's not 100% overlap. You should be looking at your potential capital sources and saying, well, okay, what is it that you can do for me? Some of you may be familiar with the term, if it's green, it spends. Money is cheap. You know, lots of people have money out there, but it really is at our level where you're just starting out, the human capital, which matters so much more than the capital to enable you to achieve the milestones required to accelerate your business to the point where it's either cash flow break even, rare in my industry, but it does happen, or that you've hit the milestones for people that do what I do, but at a later stage and a slightly larger amount of capital to say, okay, yep, you've checked the boxes to get to the point where, yeah, you're ready to go raise 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, 100 million, whatever it may be. Very quickly on diligence, for the other question, I am very much a gut level investor. If I were to draw a triangle for what my sales funnel looks like, it would look like this, with the top being my brain. So I look at lots of business plans over email that say, no, this really isn't interesting. I don't even want to talk to them. And then a little bit further down the funnel, okay, this is kind of in my wheelhouse. It seems like a unique idea. Let's do a call. And then of those calls, most, for whatever reason, don't make it, but some do. So I get to a meeting, then I get to a second meeting, then I do a bunch of diligence with my network just on the size, and then I'll offer to make an investment. The one thing that this year has prevented me in some part from doing is that face-to-face gut level check, and that's hard. And I don't know. I'm about to make investment offers to CEOs, one of whom I haven't met, one of whom I did meet. I flew to San Francisco for the day last week and met this woman outside and looking at investing in her business. And it's a lot easier for me to read somebody when you're sitting across the table from them than it is on a one or whatever it is, 2-dimensional Zoom. And so that's something that for me will be a struggle. And I don't have a good answer for the person that asked the question, but to the extent that somebody is willing to meet with me, and this is again, a personal preference, I will meet with you. I've seen enough data out there to be convinced that I'm happy to go meet with somebody. And venture capital, like life, is not without risk. And I find myself aligning with people who really are the crazy risk takers in life. And that goes back to kind of what I started this conversation with, which is alignment with your capital partners. Somebody else might say, hey, Joel, I think that's crazy. I don't really agree with how you talk about risk. Great, we're not a fit for each other, and that's okay too. So let me stop there.
It might just be Kevin and Joel's way of explaining things, but I often, hearing what they're saying now, I feel like it's not complicated. It's hard work. You just figure it out and do it. That's kind of how I feel. And Mary Alice, you've been kind of going through this. So Joel was just talking about doing this during the pandemic. You've been doing this during the pandemic too. Can you comment on the difficulty of that? What's the hard part of the raising capital on your side? And then any nuances you can mention from having done it during the pandemic?
Yeah. I love that Joel values that meeting in person. I think that's incredible and super important. And both Kevin and Joel mentioned it. It's a human experience. You're investing in humans regardless. Like, the idea can change, the business can change. And so I think that's great to hear. And what I love is that having the community, like, so there's been such a parallel between what our business is building for our community and then going through the experience of being an entrepreneur and investors. There's such a parallel there, because it's basically like investors are mentors, and that's what we're building a platform for. So we've been, witnessing that and learning about that and implementing it into our business, and also looking at what we've learned from building our business and implementing it into our own process. And I'm really grateful for that. And of course, the peers, because I think all the due diligence that Joel is talking about is just as important for the entrepreneurs to do. And I think the question someone asked, how do you raise capital? And I think Kevin mentioned earlier is having, getting really clear about what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, what the traction you need is, and then knowing yourself and knowing what you need and who you need around you, what's going to make you comfortable, what can you allow, and how much risk can you be in, because it is really scary. It's just, it's nerve-wracking. It's all new information and nobody wants to make mistakes. So of course it's like an intense thing when you start to bring other people into your vision and your baby. The dynamic of the business changes. Now you have, it's not just the idea and the concept or the will for it to live for other people that are the users, but now you also have this other experience of, like, you don't want to let these other people that are believing in you down too. And so you want to make sure that that relationship is in alignment, and that you have all the information that you need. And I think often investors have more experience and information, and so you want to make sure as the entrepreneur you're also doing the due diligence of the process. And I think everyone's process will be a little bit different, but talking to other entrepreneurs about their process, I think, is super helpful.
Thanks, Mary Alice. It's 1:55. I think it would be great if Kevin and Joel and Mary Alice could stay on for a few extra minutes. We got some great questions still in the Q&A. Nigel, though, if you want to come on and wrap up whatever it was that you were going to say at the end there, then I think we could stay on and answer at least a few more of these questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm really glad to see so much engagement. I see folks in both the chat and the Q&A. So I just wanted to make sure that at least from the Ice Jam side, we've kind of like closed out the event and done this. And it's great to see so many attendees today. And I know we've got folks who want to catch recordings of this stuff later and follow it up. And part of this is just an opportunity to get a chance to network and engage with this. And I think it's really fantastic to hear about the Alaska Angel Conference coming together just the way it is right now, and the sort of level of education that folks can get through that. So I did want to touch on briefly the Alaska Angel Conference for those who are interested. I know the link was posted in the chat a few times, but akangelconference.com is the place to go. There's a really nice button on there that tells you, like, tell me more about this event and how to get involved. So highly encourage folks to do that. And I know there's an upcoming early opportunity to apply as startups, I think on November 23rd or something like that, for folks, and that will give you some pre-access to some early funding. So please do go to that and encourage startups to start applying for the Angel Conference, just because they get access to fantastic people like you've heard from today. I wanted to touch on Ice Jam really briefly. So what we're planning to do with this going forth is that, because we've had some really great success, Ice Jam has been divided into sort of 3 categories. We have our Ice Jam network events, which some of you guys may have been to for the last couple of months. We've had our Ice Jam Learn events, which is just one of our Learn events. We're also going to have Ice Jam Socialize events to give us a chance to really sort of socialize and hang out as an entrepreneur community. But in the midst of all of this, we're going to partner up with the Alaska Startup Week that's happening really soon. So this is from November 16th to the 22nd, so just a couple of weeks away. And Ice Jam is going to hold an entire event series through that week. So there's a week in your entire calendar for the year where you really want to be clearing some space to get a chance to get into learnings. This is the week to do so. It's at November 16th to the 22nd. and we're going to be hosting, as part of a series of other events. It's going to be a great series of events from Alaska Startup Week across the whole week, but these are just a few of the ones that IceJam will be specifically hosting, aimed primarily at like innovators, inventors, folks who are trying to sort of get small business startups off the ground, so some high growth funding opportunities, the rest of it. You'll see that our very first session of the week on Monday the 16th will actually be a focus around funding your startup, because it's a popular topic, as I'm sure you can imagine, and it goes through the week getting more and more into the weeds around some of the different topic areas that we think are really relevant to folks, and we're adding more and more events as we go forward. If you want to find out more about Startup Week, we're just getting plugged straight into their website. So you'll find out about the IceJam events and all of the other events happening during the Startup Week on their website. And I didn't put the link, of course, because I meant to. I think, oh, I did. It's over here, alaskastartupweek.co. There we go. So do feel free to go to that link, and we'll throw it in the chat as well, so you know how to go and get involved in those events. And then last but not least, just as a point of wrap up, I really wanted to thank my colleagues, Meg and Solomon. They're both student interns, currently actively working as ambassadors within Center ICE, helping sort of create the background to these IceJam events, and have been just super fantastic at keeping these things on track. They create your marketing emails. They're the ones who are actively sort of behind the scenes, making this stuff come together, coordinating and organizing with the folks that are going forward. And with 5 or 6 more events coming up just this month alone, I can tell you that we're all pretty busy right now. And I really want to say hats off to Megan Solomon for thanking with this, so getting involved with this, and thank you to the Alaska Angel Conference, Mark, yourself, Kevin, Joel, and Mary Alice for taking time out of your days to come in and help provide some content to the broader Center ICE community. If anyone else wants to get plugged in to stuff that Center ICE is doing, follow your emails from this event. We will invite you guys over to Slack, so there's always a chance to engage. If you need to drop off right now, we get it, we understand. Come onto our Slack platform. A lot of the folks that are on this call are on there already, and you can bring up questions like this, ask for help. There's always opportunities to set up calls and do those kind of things. So I think for the interest of time, we're at just about 2 o'clock here. I'm going to say the formal part of this event, at least for IceJam, is over, but I'm happy to leave this running as a webinar. And for folks who want to jump up, you either can raise your hand, or we can put something in the chat. I'm happy to bring people onto audio and video so we can continue having some dialogue and hopefully get through some more of these questions for those interesting. But thank you all for being here.
Thanks. I'm going to go straight to Brian Miracle. If he's still on, which I think he is, we could bring him on and let him talk if he wants to. I don't want to put him on the spot though, but he had a great question, and that was how to what fundraising advice would you have to give to a startup that is not a tech company, and how vibrant is the non-tech investment amongst angels in Alaska? Yeah, that's interesting, especially when I think of we've been talking about revenue redemption models and non-tech companies. There's been a lot of. Kevin, maybe you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment, and I was going to kind of piggyback with what Joel was talking about. So I think, before entrepreneurs raise money from anybody, they need to understand, they need to ask the question, what's in it for them, right? It's like, know your audience, right, is the first thing. So if you're trying to raise money, then you need to understand what's in it for them, and why would they want to invest in your company. And this applies whether you're a tech company or otherwise. And so I would go back to my traction point that I made earlier, and I would say the way that you raise money is by demonstrating traction. And the definition of traction varies based on the stage of the company. So when you're very early, traction as a very early stage idea is different from a Series A post-funded company. So I think that's important. The other part of that is knowing how they can help you. So investors that are able to add money to the company can help things scale, right? They can help things start growing faster. If you've proven this marketing channel works, and your cost to acquire a customer through this channel is X, and if I could just get this much more money, then we'd be able to put it in the top of the machine, and it would trickle down, and it would generate this outcome. Investors are great at adding money to models that you've already sort of resolved. So I would be very focused with the ask. So if there's a specific ask, like we need to raise this much money to do this specific thing for this specific outcome, you're going to be much more successful. And if you dovetail that with the point that Joel made about the sort of non-monetary value add that the investor can make, I think you'll have even more success. So if you start by asking for some advice about the particular thing that you're going to do, and then weave that into the raise ask that is very well defined, I think you'll be more successful. And I think that applies across the board.
Thanks. I think Nigel brought on the people who've been asking some questions. Brian, you can respond here to Kevin, and then also Adam, you had some really good detailed questions there that Joel might be well situated to answer. And I see Cindy's on there now as well.
Yeah, I want to just apologize. I think from a tech point of view, I'm not sure that folks will have video capability, but they should be able to talk on audio right now. We have to bring them back on in a different mode to get them on video, so maybe just audio. But anyway.
Sorry, we'd love to show your face, but it doesn't seem to be possible. Brian or Adam, I don't really want to moderate too much right now. I'd like this to be more of a conversation with some great people we got on the line.
So this is Brian, just kind of jumping in and for entrepreneurs like myself that have non-tech companies, right? The understanding what investors are, just like you said, as far as knowing who those investors are, what they're interested in, what their typical investments are, what kind of appetite is there, and how do we kind of start networking with those that have an interest in non-tech startups within the state, right? To make that kind of open that conversation with, ask those questions, and kind of potentially make that pitch if there's the right fit. It's like where do they live at? Where do they live at?
Brian, just to jump in really quick, do you have a company?
I do, yeah.
So before you say what it is, let me just point out that you've been talking for about 4 minutes, and there's at least 26 people on this call, and I don't think not all of them know what you do. So you missed an opportunity to say, Brian, I'm gonna land a rocket on Mars. I'd love to learn, meet some investors who are interested in that. But here's my question. So I think use every opportunity you have to get your story out. Anytime you have somebody who's listening, tell them what you do and what you need help with. And you sound like a broken record. Be so obnoxious that every one of us, the next time we hear somebody that is talking about your space, they say, oh, you should talk to this guy named Brian. He's always asking for this specific thing. Let me introduce you.
I would be super interested on a center ice perspective to see if we could help facilitate that kind of networking opportunity, because I think that's somewhat gone. It happens at some of these events in sort of in the networking components where people go around to intermix and pitch and talk to each other, and you get pointed to the other end of the room and someone goes like, oh, you should go speak to this person, that person. It doesn't happen enough in the virtual environment, and therefore at least from my side, I feel that we could take on some of that responsibility of creating another event kind of like this around funding, but have more of that startup pitch off to investors and vice versa. So there's a little bit more of those interactions that can occur, because startups need, they need stages so that people can hear about them and see them. Otherwise, it's very hard to market your startup with no budget, no ability to sort of really get your word out there. How do you know things? But what's nice about having a great entrepreneur community is that we're all there to sort of advocate for one another and try and share ideas. So I would at least be happy to work with you and take that on, Brian. I'll throw my email in the chat, and I think we've connected in the past. So
yeah, that'd be great.
One other tip, Brian, is try to position your ask in terms of what the other person would get if they were able to meet you, rather than what you need and what's in it for you. So we know that you want money, and we all know people with money, but we don't know if we want to introduce them to you right now. And so if you could position it, and it's hard to do this, but if you could position it in a way that almost makes it seem like we would be doing our friend a favor if we introduce them to you, you would probably have more success.
Cool, that's good feedback.
Yeah. Look, I run into this problem as well. I mean, for those that are still on the call, I want you to take a step, kind of one up the chain, maybe. I have a small business too. I have a startup, right? My startup just happens to be in the business of investing capital and hopefully expertise in other startups, but I still got to go raise money. Typically what I've found in my business is there's a second or third order rule whereby I get connected to somebody and they're like, it's not a fit, or, Joel, I can't invest enough to matter. I'm like, all right, well, do you know anybody where it might be a fit? And they're like, yeah, let me send your pitch deck on to Jane at XYZ, family office or investment company or whatever the hell it is. And sometimes it's a fit with Jane, sometimes it's not, but you should always ask. I always go into every meeting assuming, who knows if it's going to be a fit or not. But one of the ways that I stay relevant with my network is every pitch I take, as I said before, usually it's not a fit for whatever reason. And by the way, a lot of times I'm wrong, but hey, that's okay too. Sorry for another time. But what I do say is, look, it's not a fit for me, and here's why. But it might be a fit for my friend Sally, who does run a CPG firm that does invest in lemonade stands. With your permission, let me send your deck over to her, and if there's mutual interest, I will make an intro. And it does two things. One, the entrepreneur is happy because it's one more opportunity. Two, frankly, I'm helping to continue the growth of small business in America, and that, frankly, is something that's more important to me than pretty much everything else. And three, selfishly, it keeps me top of mind with other venture capitalists who then think of me when they're investing in something where maybe it's not a fit for them, or where maybe they need somebody else to go fill out the last $50,000, $100,000, $500,000. I stay top of mind with them. And this is very much a business of, what have you done for me lately? I would posit that your business is very similar to that. So go into every conversation looking at it as a two-way street, not only why your business might be a fit for this investor, but if not, well, what's that investor looking for? And do you have any friends in your entrepreneur quiver who are doing something that might be more aligned with them? Because it's a small world, what goes around comes around, and my best deals come from my network, and I believe that that's just as true for other entrepreneurs as well.
That's great feedback.
One other quick comment is, one of the best investments, the best performing investments that our fund has made was referred to me by one of their customers. So one of their customers is a friend of mine. We were at dinner once, and I was telling her, how the fund was going, what kind of companies we're investing in. And she said, "Oh, have you heard of this company?" And I hadn't heard of them yet because they were in Columbus, Ohio. And, she told me about them, made the introduction, and 3 months later, we wrote a check. So I'm much more interested in a referral from a customer than from, anybody else, really. But yeah, like Joel said, that sort of trusted network and referrals is critical. So if the people who know you and like you aren't willing to refer you, then that could be a red flag. So start there. And there's some other great questions. I know we need to jump into what.
Yeah, I don't need to moderate.
Mark's not moderating, so.
We've got Cindy and Adam. Either of you guys can unmute yourself. Adam, you had some really detailed questions there. I can read some of that, but I will. So he's asking about, he says he's found that angel investors often want to give small amounts of money. And he's asking, is there a negative impact to a bill on the ability to raise funds subsequently if you take these small investments early on to prove concept out?
I would say no.
Adam should be able to speak if he needs to expand on that.
Yeah, so I'll unmute here. And some of you on the call also know me. So particularly with regard to like some of the UAF funding and what I see as more small dollar amounts, multi-$1,000 amounts to prove a concept. Can you kind of talk about how the Alaska ecosystem views that money when it comes time to go outside and raise more funding? And this is particularly based on some experience I've had with startups where a seed round can be anywhere between, a couple $100,000 to a couple $1 million. And having an investor come in for $5,000 who's either unwilling to be bought out or is expecting that to be a seed round, just doesn't seem to be the same level of financial backing that, you know, again, using Silicon Valley as the gold standard here, like that the Valley would give. And that's not to say that, you know, I'm actually looking at the Center Ice offerings for an idea and would want to use stuff inside Alaska as much as possible. But is that going to impact my ability to deal with a larger VC company when it comes to a seed round?
So I'll take the Center Ice piece, and then I'll definitely pass the rest of the question over. So on the Center Ice piece, just to be really clear with you, Adam, all of our funding is non-dilutive. So we don't take equity for any of the funding that goes out from our doors. So those are supposed to be basically treated like grants for the most part. You are getting, you know, it is cash that we've been given to pass out to try and help spur some economic activity, help drive and grow the spirit of entrepreneurship in Alaska or the innovation ecosystem. So at least, like, yeah, that's broadly speaking. And I would say that, you know, also from an entrepreneurial hat, there is a very different classification in my mind of non-dilutive funds and dilutive funds. And therefore, in the case of non-dilutive funds, I think all non-dilutive money is always good. I don't know if there's ever a bad case that an entrepreneur is taking non-dilutive funds, unless you're having to spend an obscene amount of time chasing those non-dilutive funds. Generally, any free money is always, you know, perceived as good. As far as the dilutive funds, I think it'd be worth passing that over to folks like, you know, Kevin and Joel who see that. All I will say is that I think you know, I don't know if a good comparison is a Silicon Valley valuation front versus maybe another ecosystem. So I'll pass it over to those guys.
I have kind of a hypothetical question for Joel. So Joel, if you were introduced to a company through one of your trusted connections, it was perfectly aligned with your strategy, your investment thesis, there's no portfolio overlap, you met the founders, you know, respect, trust them, everything's great about the deal, right? It's your best deal that you've seen. And during your due diligence, you identify that early on they took $5,000 from an uncle or a friend or family. And maybe there's even some hair on the terms of that deal, the investment, the $5,000 investment, maybe it wasn't super clean. Would something like that be a deal breaker, or could something like that be a deal breaker, or what would you do in that situation?
Look, it certainly could be. However, I would never make an offer to invest where I'm either setting myself up or the founders up for failure or for a harder conversation later on down the line. I don't know if there's anybody on this who knows me really well or has spoken to me before, but I probably under-index on emotional intelligence and over-index on direct feedback without regard for hurting feelings. And that is so much more important, I have found, when you're literally risking your life, right? Doing something that might take years of your life and might end up being a big old donut. So what I would do in that situation, where I'm dead set on making an investment, is saying, hey, look, I don't like this. You got to clean this up. Here's why I don't like it. Here's my offer to invest, but this is what you got to do to make your company into investable format. Typically, I mean, I'm a one-man shop. I don't want to do the heavy lifting to help the entrepreneur or to do it for them. But I will say, if you do this, here's a term sheet, right? Here's a non-binding term sheet to invest. One of the things that often comes up that really less sophisticated, or certainly people that don't do this for a living like I do, will do at really to the company's detriment, is try to take too much ownership for too little dollars. And so, you know, I often remind CEOs when I invest, hey, it's got to be a fair deal for me, meaning your valuation can't be so high that I don't own enough to work hard for you. But the other side of that coin is it's got to be a fair deal for you. You got to own enough so that when Microsoft says, hey, here's 20 million bucks, you don't say, God, Joel and those other bastards have taken so much of my company that for me to say no to this go raise another $100 million, dilute myself even more. I would have to sell for $300 million to make the same amount that I would make today at a $20 million offer. Screw it, I'm just going to sell out today. That is obviously what I don't want either. So again, it gets back to alignment, which I mentioned. And then it really comes back to the entrepreneur, is that guy or gal enough of a leader that they can convince not only crazy people to follow them on this journey vis-a-vis employees, but convince their crazy uncle that, hey, thanks so much for your $5,000 for 20% of the company. I've now got an offer to raise $500,000 for 10% of the company. I need to carve you all the way back to 3% of the company. And I'm sorry, but I think that even though your slice of the pie will be smaller, the size of the pie will be so much bigger that the projected multiple on your capital will be far in excess of what it would be had I chosen not to partner with Joel or whomever else. So the one-liner I use is, I guess in this case, 3% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And that is true 99.5 times out of 100.
Yeah, totally. And if the opportunity is good enough, you'll put in the extra time to get on the phone with the uncle, explain your position, try to work something out. I don't know if that answers your question, Adam, but that's how I think about it, at least.
Yeah, Kevin, definitely does. And Joel, thank you for the some of the insight there.
Sure thing.
All right, anybody else?
Well, I invited Cindy up. I also invited Kevin Lee to come up as well. I know that both of them mentioned some questions. I know that some of the stuff that Cindy had asked had already been somehow answered, but always nice to hear from Cindy.
Good afternoon. So yeah, thank you so much for answering that. And I've just been, I think like I mentioned too, just following more of the best practices that are coming up through the social impact networks as well. And I've always struggled with, how do you manage finding skin in the game and entrepreneurs that are willing to invest in their concept, but also, taking some security or some means to represent the entrepreneur's personal investment in that as well. But so just kind of in a thinking about or in the midst of a paradigm shift, maybe how this works. And then the question that came across on the chat too is, I think, a pretty important one is, about how do you include and fund underserved or underbanked entrepreneurs. And, that's something I think we work really hard to do, and investing in a lot of personal coaching or development activities. I could go on for days on that one, but that's it.
Yeah, I know, Kevin, I think but I don't know if Joel knows, but Cindy comes from a position where she's, Joel's still here, where I think she might be especially trying to help that crowd.
Yeah, worked with CDFIs in the past.
I don't know.
Yeah, it is, I think that, without a doubt, there are too many tall white guys in venture. That has been changing. It is kind of a head scratcher, considering that, for example, just women, to just pick on the opposite gender, control 87% of household spend. So, when I started in this industry back in 2007, the firm I started at, I was the only guy who hadn't gone to Stanford or Harvard or both. Talk about white shoe. Thankfully, that has changed and has been getting, venture has been getting, I think, more diverse and more looking like your next door neighbor, or people you see on the Southwest flight versus people that grew up in Atherton or Menlo Park and worked at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street, and then started a venture fund with $50 million from their uncle's business. It's still a problem. So you're absolutely right to ask the question, and I feel that it is important to continue to verbalize it, because otherwise people, I think, forget. And my hope is that entrepreneurs who have had significant exits, who don't look like me, right? Or didn't have the background of, you know, Harvard and Goldman and whatever else. When they have their exits and they go back to being angel investors, they remember how hard it was. And they are willing, because of their own background, to take more risk on somebody that that maybe 10 years ago, somebody at Sequoia Capital or Bessemer, or, you know, one of these white shoe firms never would have done. So it's gotten better. It is nowhere near perfect. But, you know, I was Googling, you know, firms started by immigrants. You know, Tesla was, right? Elon was from South Africa. Google was the Russian guys. eBay was Pierre Omidyar from France. Capital One was Nigel from the United Kingdom. Alexander Graham Bell started AT&T. Meg Whitman ran HP, so did Carly. So it feels like there are today logarithmic orders of magnitude more potential investors out there for really every type of business. And that really encourages me, not only because I have a deeper pool with which to say, hey, this isn't a fit for me and here's why, but maybe it's a fit for my friend Jenny Lefcourt at Freestyle VC, which I think is one of the best CPG venture firms probably in history, but certainly out there today, and gives me an excuse to email her. Then there was that opportunity presented itself back when I started in 2007. So thank you for the question. And, you know, I hope that the acceleration of what I've just described only continues to increase as more and more wealth is being created amongst entrepreneurs from all walks of life and backgrounds.
So for out of respect for our presenters' time here, I do want to just say, I think maybe we've got time for two more questions. So let's try to keep it to another 5 or 10 minutes. Thanks again for everybody who joined us, and thanks to the presenters for their time.
Just wanted to highlight, Mark, that I invited Debbie to come on and speak as well, because I know that there was a question earlier that Debbie wanted to bring up, or a comment, possibly.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just wanted to make sure that we address some of the underrepresented businesses, and you guys did talk about that. I actually happened to have stepped away for a minute to let my dog out, but I caught most of it. So, and I'm not sure if it was Cindy or Melanie who raised that, but thank you for that. And I'll just say by way of introduction that I have had a background in an early video on demand startup. Right out of the Tech School of Business. I also didn't go to Stanford or Harvard. I did go into corporate finance, but I did not work at Goldman Sachs. But I have been in the world of startup, and we did make a mistake in not geographically locating ourselves, I think, in Silicon Valley. We had some really good traction. We had an operating version of our product way before there were any of the big players like Netflix had entered into the space. But we were missing some of the things that people talked about today. I think today's event was really great, and I just really would like to see more people from the state of Alaska who are indigenous, who are doing investments like PT Capital, and McKinley got $100 million of the $200 million of private equity that was allocated to Alaska only. Well, it's supposed to be invested and deployed in Alaska. So that's something that I actually worked on for Barings, the Barings team that got the other half of the $100 million. McKinley is doing the more venture style of investing of that half of that $200 million. So I feel like you guys did a really great job of bringing in some experts, and I just would like to see more discussion and include more people that are maybe, you know, from Alaska, like indigenous, the original pioneers. I appreciate your comment, Kevin, that there were pioneers that came into Alaska, but they were like 10,000 years after the indigenous people were already here.
Yeah, I realized that I said that right after I said it as well. I apologize for that. No, obviously anybody, I mean, speaking of tenacity and perseverance, right? The indigenous people persevered through this weather and the climate and made it work, right? They thrived here. So no, point taken. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And there was actually a really great center up in the Utqiagvik. They have some really interesting work going on up there. And I don't know if they're going to be able to commercialize anything, but I know that they're supporting a lot of scientific studies up there in the Arctic. I think there will be some interesting opportunities. Like I think who was it that was talking about the increase in shipping on the high seas. Once there's like an anchor port, probably in Nome, there'll be a opportunity there to build an ecosystem to support big ships once but that's like 10 years down the line, I think.
Yeah, I think it's half the challenge. But Debbie, if you have any connections to innovators, within the native community, I would say that, I've always found it a bit of a struggle to get them engaged in some of the programming that we have at groups like Sunrise, and yet we're very much, doors open. We have had some really great, cross events where we've had groups out of like, the Alaskan Native Science and Engineering Program and set done some great collaborations with them. We've had some folks from various, like, the Tenant Chiefs Conference have brought folks down for startup weekends and those kind of collaborations. This is the right time of year for it, especially in the next couple of weeks while we have so much happening with Alaska Startup Week. So it's a great time to plug in and open doors and access to this funding. And a lot of the funding that's out there, at least at the early stage, at least the non-dilutive stuff, at least in that realm, a lot of it is very much, there's even preference towards folks that are coming from minority backgrounds, women-owned businesses, etc. So yeah, would really love if you can encourage folks over. And I try very hard to make sure that we try and invite folks in and try and make some of these sessions at least accessible to.
I'm definitely going to take you up on that, and I will be sending out emails. I've already sent out a list of people that I want to make sure that they know about that startup week. And in particular, at Cook Inlet Tribal Council, they started up a center called Fab Lab, and I want to make sure that those kids know. I see people shaking their head yes, Melanie and Kevin and Mark. So you guys are maybe already in touch with them, but if you don't have kids from Fab Labs coming,
More pitches are good. I would say from my experience, this is many emails, maybe we're getting as much buzz going is really, really a key thing at this time of year. It is one of our, greatest times of the year to get new folks engaged in our ecosystem and get more people plugged in, as well as existing folks to update everyone on what's going on. And, this year is all virtual. This is the first time Alaska Startups Week is going to be all virtual. So we're all going to have to try doubly hard to get everyone kind of engaged, find ways to network. As I said, Ice Jam will have a series of events, but beyond that, I know there'll be events hosted by lots of other organizations, lots of ways to plug in. And, there's still room, by the way, it's not like the calendar's full. If you wanted to host something very specific around, like, native innovators, something like that, I would be very open to trying to help you coordinate with the organizers statewide. I mean, Melanie's on the call and she's one of those. So actually, I'm sure some of the other folks are as well. But anyway, yeah. So.
Thank you so much.
If we don't, so I think we could wrap this up. I think we've got addressed pretty much everybody's comments and questions here. I wanted to say thanks one last time to Nigel and the Center Ice team for hosting this, Kevin Croy for taking the time out of your day, Mary Alice, you are the hardest worker here, so thank you. I know you got plenty of work to going on there. And Joel, thanks for visiting from outside the state. We hope to stay in touch and hope that you can come up here more often. Thanks again to all of our guests. Yeah, thanks. I hope that you can join more of our Center Ice Jam events.